On the day I received the admission letter from Harvard, my cousin's sister covered her stomach and knelt in front of me, saying that she was pregnant with my boyfriend's child, and begging me to help us fulfill them. I couldn't help but laugh. I was just worrying about how to break off the engagement with the scumbag. Isn't it great to graduate from a famous school, inherit the family property, and become a billionaire rich woman? Men will only affect my speed of making money. After dying suddenly from overwork, I was reborn. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a pair of pitiful eyes. My cousin's sister Rose, wearing a plain white dress and carrying a large suitcase, was standing at my door. This was 1 month before the college entrance examination. Rose, a junior, came to my house under the pretext that my house was close to her school. Rose, why didn't you tell Uncle in advance when you came? Uncle will pick you up. My dad pushed me aside, pulled Rose into the house, and then moved into my room, rubbing my arm that was hurt by my dad's bump. I narrowed my eyes. What did I do in my previous life? The profound memory is easily recalled. Proud as I was unwilling to give up my room and had a big fight with my dad, and was slapped by my dad. Because of this, my mom had a big fight with my dad, and their already problematic relationship was on thin ice. Not only that, next, Rose had all kinds of ambiguous interactions with my boyfriend Charles. Unwilling to be robbed of everything by Rose, I was unable to concentrate on my studies. All I could think about was how to make Rose leave my house and leave my boyfriend. Therefore, I, who had always had excellent grades since childhood, performed abnormally in the college entrance examination, and could only get into a junior college with my scores. Then, my parents got divorced, and I was with my dad. Rose framed me for pushing her down the stairs, and I was kicked out of the house by my dad. Rose married Charles, who also came from a superior family background, with tens of millions of betrothal gifts from my dad. And after graduating from college, I couldn't find a suitable job and entered the assembly line of a factory and died suddenly from overwork. After being reborn, I took the initiative to give up my bedroom and moved into the attic on the 3rd floor. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to seize the opportunity of the college entrance examination. My previous life's experiences made me understand that only being strong oneself is the most important. There is only me living on the 3rd floor, which is very quiet. I study late into the night every day. I pretended not to know all the little tricks between Rose and Charles. Finally, after the college entrance examination ended, I was fought over by Harvard and Peking University with high scores. In the end, I chose Harvard. It wasn't until I got the admission letter from Harvard that my hanging heart finally settled. I pushed open the attic window and let out a breath of foul air. Now, it's time to start settling the scores between me, Rose, Charles, and my dad. When I went downstairs, I just saw Rose leaning in Charles's arms, smiling shyly. Seeing me, Charles pushed Rose away and came towards me. Yvonne, you finally came down. Some time ago, you were busy studying and didn't have time to pay attention to me. Next, you have to accompany me well. Saying that, Charles was about to reach out and pull me. I took a step back and opened the distance between us. But it seems that someone is already accompanying you. I looked at Rose meaningfully. After a moment of embarrassment, his face returned to normal. Charles pretended to be unrestrained and said, Yvonne, what are you thinking? I'm close to Rose only because she is your cousin's sister. The merciless words made Rose's face turn pale, but I happily curved my lips. Charles and I belong to a wealthy marriage alliance. It was an arranged baby marriage, since we were young. So in my previous life, I always treated Charles as my future husband. That's why when Rose snatched Charles away, I couldn't accept it. At this point in my previous life, under my strong obstruction, Charles and Rose were already deeply in love. But now, perhaps because there is no catalyst like me, up to now, Charles is still secretly dating Rose behind my back. although cooperating with Charles can make Rose uncomfortable. But it makes me even more disgusted. How can I break off my engagement with Charles as soon as possible? While thinking, I quickly had an idea. I looked at Charles affectionately. Anyway, I will marry you sooner or later. Why don't we get married? Get married? Rose was the first to exclaim. Why? Cousin sister is not willing? Or does cousin sister want to replace me and marry Charles? The words that hit the nail on the head made Rose's lips tremble. Not knowing what to say. Charles's expression was also a bit awkward. Obviously, he hasn't enjoyed enough of the happiness of having two boats. So, I added fuel to the fire. Charles, I was admitted to Harvard. If Aunt knows, she will definitely be very happy. Did you really get admitted to Harvard? Charles's eyes lit up. After seeing me nod, ecstasy appeared on his face. Wait for me. I'll go back and tell my mom right away. The Zhang family made a fortune in the coal mining business a few years ago. Later, although the coal mining business was not doing well, they had a thick family fortune and also invested in some other businesses. Although their family is rich, none of them are successful in their studies. The person with the highest educational background in their family is Charles. He is 3 years older than me. After graduating from high school, he entered society without going to college. Therefore, the Zhang family is often secretly criticized by people, saying that they are just a bunch of nouveau rich and can't be on the stage. The more they lack something, the more they love to show off. Wherever Mother Zhang goes, she will show off my good grades. Now that I am admitted to Harvard, she must hope that I can marry into the Zhang family as soon as possible. As soon as Charles left my house, Rose couldn't hold back and covered her stomach and knelt in front of me. Yvonne, I'm sorry for you. I'm pregnant with Charles's child. I know. After all, the condoms used by Charles and Rose were punctured by me in advance with a needle. My resounding words made Rose's crying stop. How could you know? Curving my lips, I didn't say anything and went upstairs. It seems that there will be a battle in the afternoon. I need to have a good rest for a while and conserve my energy. Bang! 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 I was awakened by the violent knocking on the door. Immediately after, my father's irascible voice sounded outside the door. You lock the door even when you are at home. All you do all day is study and sleep. I'm afraid I haven't raised a pig. Why don't you learn from your cousin? She gets up early to cook every day and also. Frowning, I walked straight to the door and opened it. Seeing my expressionless face, my father's chatter stopped abruptly. Then, anger appeared on his face. You damned girl. How dare you look at me with such an expression? As he said that, his palm was about to hit me. I quickly went downstairs, leaving his slap in vain. Downstairs, Father Zhang, Mother Zhang and Charles were laughing happily. When they saw me, this smile magnified several times. However, Rose, who was serving tea and water on the side, had tears in her eyes. It seems that Charles' family still doesn't know about Rose's pregnancy. TSK. I thought Rose was so capable. I didn't expect that I would have to expose this matter personally. Uncle, Aunt. I walked in front of Mother Zhang. Mother Zhang saw the Harvard admission letter in my hand at a glance and took it and looked at it again and again. Then she handed the admission letter to Father Zhang and instead took my hand. Our Yvonne is just excellent. Auntie loves you to death. When my father came down, she couldn't wait to say to my father-in-laws, Charles is in his 20s and Yvonne is an adult. Why don't we hold the wedding first and get the marriage certificate later? How about it? The Zhang family is more powerful than my family. After hearing Mother Zhang's words, my father temporarily put aside his dissatisfaction with me and forced a smile. Of course it's good. Then when do you think is a good time to set the date? Seeing that Father Zhang, Mother Zhang and my father had already started discussing the date of my marriage to Charles. I just found it ridiculous. My mother hasn't come back from the company yet. They are blatantly ignoring my mother. Looking at Rose on the side again. Her eyes were staring straight at Charles. Charles, who would melt at Rose's smile in the past, was sitting upright at this time and ignored Rose's hints. TSK. In the face of interests. Their love seems to be nothing. Why not set it for next month, and hold the wedding before Yvonne starts school? I think it's okay. Father Zhang. Mother Zhang and my father agreed immediately. At this time, I spoke, Uncle. Aunt. I also want to marry Charles. But, as I said that, I looked at Rose with an accusing look and said a grieved lie. But she, behind my back, actually seduced Charles and is pregnant with Charles' child. My words shocked everyone present. Yvonne, are you mistaken? She is your cousin. I also wish I was mistaken. But this was what she told me herself not long ago. At this time, the eye drops I dropped in advance could finally be released. Tears plop. Fell down. I lowered my head and pretended to cry. But out of the corner of my eye I was looking at Rose. Among the 3 brothers of the Yvonne family, only my father was admitted to college and married my mother. He established the Yvonne family group with the help of my mother's family power. However, the main person in charge of the group is my mother. My father is just a nominal president. Although the families of my father's elder brother and younger brother have a much better life under my father's secret support, they can't be compared with my family at all. Rose has envied me since she was a child. I've already said it to this extent. If Rose still doesn't seize this opportunity to marry into a wealthy family, I will look down on her. Fortunately, this time, she didn't let me down. Rose, who was stared at by everyone, knelt in front of Father Zhang and Mother Zhang, uncle and aunt. Charles and I truly love each other. Before Father Zhang and Mother Zhang could react, Charles couldn't wait to stand up. I clearly took safety measures. How could you be pregnant? With this sentence, this matter is confirmed. Charles, I don't know how this happened either. Didn't you say that you don't like Yvonne at all? That she is dull and wooden? And that you will break off the engagement with her sooner or later and be with me? You also said. Shut up. The impatient Charles slapped Rose on the face. In the next second, Father Zhang ticked Charles in the stomach. You bastard thing. You have disgraced our Zhang family. What are you hitting your son for? Mother Zhang wouldn't listen. I think it's clearly Rose. This bitch. Who seduced my son? If you want to hit someone, hit her. Mother Zhang grabbed Rose's hair. My father quickly went to stop her. The enraged Mother Zhang even scratched my father. Afraid of being scratched on the face, my father took a step back. And then Rose was beaten on the ground by Mother Zhang. Rose, who couldn't dodge, suddenly covered her stomach. Child. My child. A smear of bright red flowed from Rose's legs to the floor. Afraid of getting involved in a lawsuit over a human life, Mother Zhang quickly stopped and dialed 120. Half an hour later, Rose was carried into the ambulance. Father Zhang. Mother Zhang. Charles and my father followed nervously. I sat on the sofa in the living room, looking at the figures walking out the door. And a sneer appeared on the corner of my mouth. Just at this moment, a gloomy gaze swept over. It was my father. He suddenly turned his head and just caught the smile on my face. I subconsciously restrained my smile. Soon I realized that I am no longer the cowardly and incompetent self who was suppressed by him in my previous life. I raised my head and gave my father a defiant smile, seeing my provocative eyes for the first time. My father was filled with anger and seemed to come back to settle scores with me. However, the ambulance outside couldn't wait. He could only get on the ambulance and leave. Not long after the ambulance left, my mother came back. She was dressed in a figure-hugging business suit with her hair in a bun. In her 40s. Although there were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, she still had an air of charm. Only her hair was slightly disheveled. Obviously in a hurry to come back. Yvonne. Auntie told me that something has happened. What's going on? Busy with her career. Her tone was a bit cold, but her eyes were full of concern. Unfortunately, I didn't see this concern in my previous life. At that time, I never thought about whether my mother worked so hard for me. I just felt that my mother only cared about going to work and making money and didn't love me at all. I was rebellious since I was young, and loved to oppose my mother. Even when my mother gave up the Yvonne family group and divorced my father, the only condition was to take me away. Because I was unwilling to lose to Rose just like this, I resolutely chose to be with my father. In the end, my disappointed mother didn't want anything and left the house with nothing and went abroad. Thinking of this, my nose couldn't help but turn sour. Mom. I threw myself into her arms and hugged her tightly. Mom. You're finally back. In my previous life, I was rarely close to my mother. Since being reborn, we have become much closer. However, compared with ordinary mothers and daughters, there is still some distance. My mother's body stiffened at first, and then she relaxed and patted my back unskillfully. Yvonne, have you been wronged? Yes. I nodded and told her what happened today. Charles and Rose are secretly together, and they even have a child. That's too much. My mother was furious. I'll go find them to settle accounts right now. Today, the Shang family and the eldest one's family must give me an explanation. Saying that, my mother took me by the hand and went out. Drove me to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, Rose was lying on the hospital bed, barely breathing. Shang's father and mother, Charles, and my father were all in the ward. The other 3 people had ugly expressions. Only my father was showing concern to Rose. Rose. Does it hurt? Are you hungry? If you feel uncomfortable, tell Uncle. My child. Rose touched her stomach and shed tears. My father's tone was even gentler. The child is fine. Now you just need to take good care of yourself. Don't worry about anything else. Thank you, Uncle. My mother, who couldn't listen anymore, directly pushed open the door of the ward and sneered. When you treated Yvonne, you weren't so considerate. Those who don't know might think that Rose is not your niece but your illegitimate daughter. My mother is simply speaking for me, and saying everything I want to say. Not surprisingly, my father was also angry. He who has little ability in his career loves to be more temperamental than my mother. Vera. What are you talking nonsense? I have seen my father like this many times. Only this time, I caught a trace of something on my father's face but I had never noticed before. Guilt. Looking at my father and then at Rose on the bed. A bold idea arose in my heart. Am I talking nonsense? Rose even dares to steal Yvonne's fiancé. She is so shameless. You still protect her. Do you have our mother and daughter in your eyes? Rose is just young and ignorant. Moreover, she is not an outsider. She is my niece. Seeing that the two were about to have a big fight, I quickly grabbed my mother's hand. Mom. My mother, who came to her senses, took a deep breath and temporarily suppressed her anger towards my father. Then she turned to look at Shang's father and mother. Shang's father and mother, who were originally watching the show, immediately tensed up. In-laws. That. Don't call me in-laws. Since your son is not proper, this marriage is off. Before Shang's father and mother could express their opinions, my father hurriedly stood up. It's a pity to call it off. Why not let Rose replace Yvonne and marry Charles? That won't do. Shang's mother immediately widened her eyes. Yvonne was admitted to Harvard. What about Rose? She went to some unknown pheasant university. She is also from the countryside. Our Shang family doesn't want such a daughter-in-law. In my opinion, let Rose have an abortion and go back to her hometown. Let's just pretend this never happened. We can't let a bitch affect the harmony between our 2 families. Right? In-laws. Shang's mother looked at my mother. My mother glanced at my father's livid face. She comfortingly patted my hand and then said slowly, "This is not impossible." Seeing my mother give in, Shang's mother heaved a big sigh of relief. Since this is the case, I'll ask the doctor to prepare for an abortion immediately. Saying that, Shang's mother was about to make arrangements. Rose. who was originally lying on the bed and could hardly speak, suddenly got out of bed and hugged Charles's leg. "Charles, how can you be so cruel to me? Woo woo woo," she cried pitifully. Charles showed hesitation. Seeing this, Chang's mother was extremely angry. "You bitch. Don't touch my son." Saying that, she went to pull Rose. But at this moment, two figures rushed in. "How dare you bully my daughter? I'll fight you to the death." The ones who rushed in were Rose's parents. They obviously just got the news and came. Seeing Rose being bullied, they pushed Chang's mother away and started beating her. Chang's father also joined the fight. Rose's parents are used to doing farm work and are strong. Chang's father and mother are no match for them. Seeing their parents being beaten and screaming, Charles also rushed in. The 6 people rolled into a ball on the ground. Theft. I couldn't help laughing. My laughter attracted my father's attention. He strode towards me angrily. "Yvonne, you are too much. If it weren't for you, how could things have come to this?" "Me? What does it have to do with me? Isn't it Rose who is shameless?" "Shut up. I won't." "Why? Could it be really like what my mother said? Rose is not your niece but your illegitimate daughter?" After my words fell, my father's face turned livid. "Nonsense. Today I must teach you a good lesson." As he said this, my father raised his hand at me. Instinctively, my mother shielded me behind her. "How dare you?" "Why wouldn't I dare? Vera, if you stop me, believe it or not, I'll hit you too." A cool young voice full of sarcasm came in from outside the ward at this moment. "This is really ridiculous. I've never seen a father who can't bear to see his daughter do well." I turned around and saw a face that was both strange and familiar. The young man had delicate features, distinct contours, and was extremely handsome. The abrasion on the corner of his eye, and the blood at the corner of his mouth not only didn't damage this handsomeness, but added a few touches of enchantment to him. There was obvious hostility in his eyes, full of fierceness. It was my high school classmate Julian. After graduating from high school, I haven't seen many of my high school classmates. The reason I find him familiar is that before I was reborn, I happened to see him once. At that time, I was leaving work as usual. On the road, I was stopped by 2 men. Julian showed up in a luxury car, with just a simple honk. Those 2 men were so scared that they ran away. I thanked Julian. He said, "You're welcome, old classmate." Only then did I dig out a few fragments of memories about Julian from the depths of my memory. While feeling grateful, I also felt very embarrassed. My high school classmate is doing very well. But me, pulling back my drifting thoughts, I looked at this face again. Now he is not as calm as he was before I was reborn and seems much more immature. But still handsome. "Who do you think you are? My family's affairs are none of your business as a brat. Today, I will teach my daughter a lesson." Mocked by an outsider, my father with a strong sense of self-esteem felt even more embarrassed. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to hit me. My mother shielded me in front of her. And his slap didn't stop. He actually planned to hit my mother too. I went to stop my father's slap. A hand was faster than me and firmly restrained my father's arm. It was Julian. My furious father wanted to teach Julian a lesson too. But his hand was blocked by Julian and he couldn't move at all. The 2 confronted each other. Julian looked relaxed while my father's face turned purple. Finally, a medical staff noticed the commotion here and rushed into the ward to break up the fight. My father took the opportunity to withdraw his hand and turned around to look at Rose. I turned around to thank Julian, but found that he had already left. At the end of the long corridor, his figure was thin. Loneliness lingered. Half an hour later, under the comfort of the hospital staff, the people present barely calmed down, except for my father who ostensibly cared about Rose but was actually detached from the matter. Everyone else had messy faces, and looked disheveled and in a sorry state. The Zhang family held their chins high and were extremely arrogant. Rose's parents lowered their heads, looking uneasy. Their biggest dream is to let Rose marry into a wealthy family. And just now, the wealthy family was beaten to the ground by them. The child in Rose's stomach must be aborted, Father Jean said angrily. Mother Jean echoed. Even if I die, I won't let Rose marry into our family. How can that be? Yvonne's father was unhappy. Your Charles has made our Rose pregnant. If you are not responsible, we will go to the gate of your company and make a scene, and let everyone judge. Yvonne's father's words made Father Zhang and Mother Zhang's faces look ugly. 200,000. That's a life. Can you buy a life with just 200,000? You. Father Jean interrupted Yvonne's mother's insistence. 500,000. This time. As soon as his words fell, David and Mavis nodded hurriedly. Deal. On the hospital bed, Rose directly fainted from crying. It was a real faint. Unfortunately, even if she fainted, she still couldn't avoid going to the operating table. After dealing with David's family, the exhausted Father Zhang and Mother Zhang looked at my mother-in-laws. After the child in Rose's stomach is gone, let Charles marry Yvonne. What do you think? My mother's eyes flashed slightly. That depends on how your Charles behaves. Don't worry. If Charles messes around in the future, I'll break his leg. Mother Zhang pulled Charles over. Charles nodded absently to guarantee. His eyes kept glancing in the direction where Rose was pushed away. Without chatting more with Mother Zhang, my mother took me and left. In the car, while driving, my mother asked me, "What do you think about the marriage with Charles? That kind of scumbag is not worthy of me at all." At the thought of Charles, I was filled with disgust. So disgusted that it made me physically uncomfortable. Cheating, cowardly, and irresponsible. There is no merit in him at all. In my previous life, I was really blinded by lard and actually competed with Rose for a piece of shit. My words made the worry on my mother's brow dissipate a little. So what do you want to do now? I want to break off the engagement with Charles. Although dragging it out with Charles for a while can cause deeper harm to Charles and Rose. But just thinking about the title of Charles Fiancé makes me feel sick. Mom, if Rose has an abortion, won't the Zhang family continue to pester me? I told my mother my worry. She smiled reassuringly at me. Don't worry. Leave it to Mom. When we got home, my mother first called Mother Zhang. In-laws. Has the child in Rose's stomach been aborted? Not yet. The doctor said we have to wait for her to wake up and check her physical condition before having the operation. I think that bitch Rose is clearly pretending to be fainted. Yes. A person who can seduce her sister's boyfriend can't be a good person. In-laws. Don't be soft-hearted at a critical moment. Charles is not infertile. After Charles and Yvonne get married in the future, they can have 7 or 8 children. After ending the call with Mother Zhang, my mother looked at me. Before I could ask, she declared to me, Charles is an only child. Back then, Zhang's father and mother went to great lengths to have this child. It is said that there was a problem with Zhang's father. So considering the issue of carrying on the family line, Zhang's mother may not let Rose go on the operating table? My eyes lit up. My mother smiled and tapped my forehead. Smart. In this way, the Zhang family will have no face to pester us. And even if Rose can give birth to a child, the Zhang family will look down on her. Hearing this, I looked at my mother with admiration in my eyes. Mom, you are so amazing. My mother smiled and hugged me, gently stroking my head. No one can bully my daughter. Feeling my mother's warm embrace, my nose couldn't help but turn sour. My mother had said these words in my previous life too. What was my reply? I said, if you really don't want me to be bullied, you should help me snatch Charles back. But, Yvonne, Charles isn't worth it. No matter if it's worth it or not. I just like him. I was like being possessed. My only wish was to separate Rose and Charles. Unable to persuade me, My mother went to see Zhang's father and mother with a long face but was looked down upon by them. Sure enough. Since Charles had treated me like this and I still didn't want to let go. With a daughter like me. Wasn't my mother looked down upon by others? Yvonne. What's wrong with you? Sensing my emotional fluctuations. My mother asked with concern. I buried myself in my mother's arms and said in a muffled voice. Mom. I think my dad. He doesn't deserve to be my dad. Just as if he wasn't close enough to me before. There always seemed to be something between my mother and my father. Usually. My mother is busy with work. While my father squanders my mother's money everywhere and pretends. Now that I think about it. There have been problems in their relationship for a long time. Only considering me. My mother has always insisted on living with my father. But now. I can see clearly. I can give up a father who doesn't care about me and doesn't pay attention to me. I hope my mother can file for divorce from my father. But she didn't. She just hugged me tightly. After a long time, she let out a sigh. Although a bit disappointed. It's understandable. After all, in my previous life, my mother filed for divorce from my father a year later. At that time, I had been driven to a mental breakdown by Charles, Rose, and my father. She was completely disappointed in my father and wanted to take me away. And now, except for protecting Rose, my father doesn't seem to have done anything unforgivable. Although I really want to get rid of my father as soon as possible. I know that some things can't be rushed. In the afternoon, my mother went out to prepare a feast for celebration of being admitted to a higher school for me. I called all the servants in the villa and ordered, throw out all of Rose's things. Yes. I endured Rose for a while for the sake of studying before. From now on, I will never give anyone a chance to hurt me again. After all of Rose's things were thrown out, the servants cleaned my room. I moved back from the attic. In the evening, my mother came back first. Right after, my father came back. Seeing us, his expression was no longer arrogant but rather embarrassed. He walked up to my mother and took her hand. During the day at the hospital, I was also extremely angry. Don't be angry with me. Usually, even if he knows he has done something wrong, my father won't apologize. Now he must have some ulterior motive. My mother pulled her hand out and had an indifferent expression. Looking at you like this. The child in Rose's stomach wasn't aborted? Being directly exposed of his inner thoughts. My father was a bit embarrassed. Charles had a checkup. He has weak sperm. It will probably be difficult for him to have a child in the future. This is also a helpless measure. So what? My mother stared fixedly at my father. Facing the calm my mother. My father's inner guilt turned into anger. It's Yvonne herself who is not competitive and not liked by Charles. Since Rose is already pregnant with Charles's child, this marriage might as well be given to Rose. My mother also has a temper, and immediately darkened her face. Zachary. I don't care about this marriage. But what do you mean? What do you mean by Yvonne is not likable? In your eyes. Is only your niece Rose the most likable? Isn't it? My father stood up and slapped the table. He pointed at me. Look at her expression as if I owe her millions. Where is she likable? Unlike Rose. Who will bring me tea and water? Ask about my well-being. And also, shut up. My mother was so angry that her chest rose and fell. Afraid that my mother would get sick from anger. I quickly stepped forward and soothed her. Mom. Let's not be angry. It doesn't matter if Dad doesn't love me. Anyway, I still have you. Seeing my concern, my mother took a deep breath and tried hard to suppress her anger. Ignoring Zachary, she took my hand and went upstairs. Upstairs. She looked at me. Your dad. She wanted to say something, but when the words came to her lips, she couldn't say them. I held my mother's hand back. Mom. In my heart, I don't have a dad. From childhood to adulthood, my dad has never cared about me. Never taken care of me. Never attended my parents' meeting. Never. He has never participated in any big or small things in my life. He has no affection for me at all. Only disgust. But he is different towards Rose. In front of Rose, he is like a father. Sometimes I even thinking of that inner guess. I gritted my teeth and then said, I think Rose is his daughter. And I am a stumbling block, who has taken his daughter's position. Yvonne. Startled by my words, my mother exclaimed, Mom can guarantee that you are your father's child. As for Rose, your dad is selfish. All along, he has wanted to suck my blood and subsidize his two brothers. He inherently thinks that he and his two brothers are a family, and that I am an outsider. He puts you in the same position as me. So that's why Rose definitely isn't your dad's child. Don't worry. If your dad doesn't love you, Mom will love you twice as much. Hearing this, I nodded and didn't continue to dwell on this issue. Instead, I said, does my dad mean to let Rose marry Charles? Did Zhang's father and mother accept her because Rose is pregnant? If that's the case, it's too cheap for Rose. Of course not. I know Zhang's father and mother too well. I guess they are thinking of letting Rose secretly give birth to the child. At that time, you and Charles will raise it. They asked your father to come back as a mediator. But how could your father be willing to let his precious niece suffer such grievances? So when he comes back this time, he wants me to come forward and persuade Zhang's father and mother to let Rose marry into the Zhang family. I'm not so stupid. After arguing with your father just now, I'm afraid he can't bring it up. After listening to my mother's words, I couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. My mom is awesome. That's right. My mother looked arrogant. Your entrance banquet is set for 3 days later. I'll send you the address of the hotel later. In these few days, you can invite your classmates to your entrance banquet at ease. Leave other things to Mom. On the day of the entrance banquet, I will announce the cancellation of your engagement with Charles. Okay, Mom. Back in my room, I still had some doubts. My mother's ability is even more outstanding than I thought. She is so smart that she can be sure that Rose is not born by my father. Could it be that I really guessed wrong on this point? Shaking my head, I put this question aside for the time being. I took out my phone and sent invitations to several good friends for the entrance banquet. At the end of inviting, I thought of Julian. He is in the same class as me. But in high school, I had very little impression of him. In my impression, he always sat in the last row of the classroom. During class, he either slept or played with his mobile phone. The teacher was too lazy to care about him. He often fought with others and was called by the teacher to see his parents from time to time. Originally a typical rebellious student. However, because he is handsome, his drawer is always filled with love letters. But he didn't touch those love letters at all and threw them into the trash can regularly. I had very little interaction with him. But in this life and the previous life, he helped me twice. After hesitating for a moment, I still sent a message to Julian. Since I'm not very familiar with him, my tone is relatively polite. I have an entrance banquet in 3 days. Are you free? Unexpectedly, the other party replied quickly with just one simple word, okay. Several good friends, regardless of whether they did well in the exam or not, all have entrance banquets in these few days. On this day, I got myself ready and was about to go out. My father, who was sitting on the sofa, looked me up and down. There was more severity in his eyes. Yvonne, is there something? My tone was cold. Frowning unhappily, my father said, your cousin is still lying in the hospital recuperating. How can you still have the mind to go out and play? According to what you said, my cousin is still lying in the hospital bed. How can you have the mind to drink tea at home? I think you should stay by her side in the hospital all the time. My unceremonious retort made my father's face look ugly. I stayed up late last night. I can't hold on today. Oh. In a hurry to go out. I was too lazy to waste any more words with him. When I walked to the door, My father's voice came again. Remember to find time to visit your cousin. I'm afraid asking me to visit Rose is false. Taking the opportunity to let Rose do ideological work on me is the real intention. Ignoring his words as if I didn't hear them, I lifted my foot and left. After attending my good friend's entrance banquet and on the way back, I asked the driver to take a detour to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, Rose was sitting on the bed eating fruits fed by David and Mavis. Our Rose is really amazing. It seems that she will marry into a wealthy family sooner or later. What's the use of Yvonne studying well? She can't even keep a man. When you marry Charles, ask your uncle to give you more dowry. The three of them had their plans all figured out. I pushed the door open and entered at the right time. But just now Aunt Jean called me and told me that Charles is absolutely impossible to marry Rose. When Rose gives birth to the child, she will be sent back to the countryside. My words made the expressions of the few people in the room change drastically. Yvonne, now that things have come to this point, even if you marry Charles, you can only get his person but not his heart. At this time, the pride on Mavis's face had completely disappeared, replaced by bitterness all over her face. Yvonne, you have been lucky since childhood and lack nothing. Rose is different. Can you not compete with her for Charles? While Mavis was speaking, Rose was already in tears. Yvonne, for the sake of me being your sister, can you let me go? David's attitude was still tough. Yvonne, even if you don't agree to cancel the engagement with Charles, your father will find a way to let Rose marry Charles. If you don't let go now, it will only be you who will lose face in the end. This family of three, in harmony, uses both soft and hard tactics. If it were me in the previous life who was kind and weak, I would probably have thought it was my problem long ago. But, what do you mean I let you go? It's Rose who shamelessly seduced my fiancé and got pregnant with my fiancé's child. I'm really unlucky to have anything to do with people like you. I tell you, Rose, no matter what means you have, I won't withdraw from the marriage with Charles. You can give birth to the child. At that time, your child will call me Mom, and you will always be in the dark. At most, the child will call you Aunt. Hearing this, the few people in the room were so angry that they were speechless. Bang! At this moment, the aunt who came in to deliver food accidentally broke the bowl. Sorry. I'm so clumsy. She hurriedly picked up the broken ceramics on the ground and accidentally cut her hand. I couldn't bear to watch anymore and took a step forward. Let me do it. I squatted down and helped her pick up the broken bowl. After picking it up, I stood up and was about to throw these into the trash can. As I looked up, my sight inadvertently fell on the face of the aunt who delivered food and couldn't leave anymore. Very similar to Rose. The conjecture that I had suppressed originally came up again. Noticing that I was staring at her face, the aunt who delivered food quickly lowered her head and said to me, "Thank you." Nothing. I patted her shoulder soothingly and incidentally pulled a hair from her head. As soon as I walked out of the ward door, I saw Charles. His expression was very excited. Yvonne, that's great. You don't mind that Rose gave birth to my child, and are still willing to be the child's biological mother. Don't worry. I will definitely treat you well in the future. As he said this, his eyes looking at me were full of affection. It seemed that what I had said in the ward just now was overheard by him. I was simply furious. In my previous life, I must have been so blind. I actually felt unwilling that Rose had snatched such a thing. What about Rose? I deliberately raised my volume. After she gives birth to the child, just give her a sum of money. Charles said it very inferently. Inside the room, as Charles' words were spoken, there was another exclamation. Rose fainted again. As for whether it was a real faint or a fake one, I didn't care. I looked at Charles' expressionlessly. What I said just now was just to deliberately anger Rose. From the moment you hooked up with Rose, we have had no relationship at all. Please go back and tell your parents this. Otherwise, Your parents will keep saying everywhere that I am your family's future daughter-in-law. It's quite embarrassing to be associated with people like you." After saying these words and ignoring Charles' reaction, I lifted my foot and left. The day before my entrance banquet, my mother and I returned after choosing formal dresses. We found Rose and her parents appearing at my house. The family of 3 was lying on the sofa, eating melon seeds and watching TV. The villa was full of melon seed shells and spilled tea. In a mess. "What are you doing here?" I looked at them. David leaned back on the sofa again. "What are you talking about? Yvonne? We are family. Rose has just been discharged from the hospital and can't be delayed. If she doesn't stay here, where can she stay?" At this time, the servant was carrying things down from upstairs. I took a closer look and it was actually something from my room. Noticing my gaze, Rose innocently said, "Yvonne, Uncle said I need a good environment to recuperate. So please trouble yourself to live in the attic or a guest room." Good heavens. They actually occupied my room without notifying me again. I was furious. Just as I was about to speak, my mother spoke up before me. "Security. Throw this family of 3 out. How dare you? Do you know who I am? I am the elder brother of the male owner of your villa. If you dare to do anything, I will fire all of you." David was full of arrogance. However, the security guards ignored them at all. After all, this villa is my mother's dowry given by my grandparents. The thrown-out 3 people sat at the entrance of my villa and cursed non-stop. I said leisurely, "If you keep making noise, I will call the police." As I said this, I took out my phone. As I pressed 110, the 3 people immediately fell silent. They got up from the ground, took their few belongings and left. "Rose." I called out to Rose at this time. "What else do you want?" At this time, Rose couldn't pretend anymore. She covered her stomach and looked at me with full of defense and hatred in her eyes. "Don't you dare touch my child." I sneered. "Just relying on a child. You can't marry into the Shang family. The Shang family values face the most. Only by making the matter of you being pregnant with Charles' child known to everyone can the Shang family possibly let you enter through the front door openly. Why are you so kind?" Rose's expression was very touched. She wasn't completely brainless. Soon, she understood. "Yvonne, you did it on purpose. You want the Shang family to be disgraced here." "Yes. I did it on purpose. I've given you the opportunity. Take it if you want it." Not long after David's family left, my father returned. In the living room, he had an unprecedented quarrel with my mother. Because of me. Because of Rose. Their quarrel extended far from Rose seducing Charles at the beginning. My father felt that over the years, my mother, thinking that she could make money, had always been above him, making him feel very humiliated. As for my mother, in addition to feeling that I had been wronged, her biggest knot was my father's years of cold violence. My mother, who had always been elegant and self-controlled, couldn't help but break down emotionally at this time. "Zachary, you are useless. You are incompetent. And you are chauvinistic. You don't protect your wife and child. You are heartless and blind. Vera, you are looking for death." My father raised his palm and was about to hit my mother. Of course, his slap didn't land on my mother. In my dread, it was stopped by the security guard. "Beats Zachary to death. The harder you beat, the better." Next, the living room was filled with Zachary's screams. I had wanted to do this for a long time. In my previous life, even if I ended up only going to a junior college, it was not impossible to live a good life through hard work. It was Zachary, Rose, and Charles. No matter what job I found, they would use their power to mess up my job. In my tragic life in my previous life, although there was also the reason that I was blinded by greed. From beginning to end, I had done nothing wrong. It was these bad people who had been bullying me. From the moment I was reborn, I had wanted to beat Zachary to death. But when it was really done, I didn't feel very happy in my heart. Because of my mother. My mother's face was full of hurt. Mom. I stepped forward and took my mother's hand, calling out carefully. Mom is fine. My mother forced a smile at me. When Zachary was beaten until he couldn't make a sound, my mother said to the security guard, "Stop." I was still a bit unwilling to let Zachary go just like this. My mother patted my hand soothingly. Tomorrow is your entrance banquet. It's not good to make things too big. In this way. I didn't say anything else. Zachary was sent to the hospital. At the door of the ward, my mother had someone specially guarding it. In the evening, the light in my mother's room was always on. Unable to set my mind at ease, I walked to the door of my mother's room. Inside the room, I saw her take out all the group photos of her and my father one by one. First, she looked at them and recalled the past. And then she tore them up fiercely. Yes, I only saw my father's faults. But I didn't see everything that my father and my mother had experienced in the past. Sensing my arrival, my mother waved at me. I walked over and nestled in my mother's arms. My mother's voice came from above my head. At the beginning, when I wanted to marry your father, your grandparents didn't agree. They said that your father had a poor background and was not strong in personal ability. I was charmed by your father's sweet words, and was determined to marry him. Now it seems that I really made the wrong choice. Mom, everyone will make wrong choices in life. As long as you find your mistakes in time. Moreover, I raised my head and looked at my mother. Moreover, if you hadn't been with my father, maybe you wouldn't have such a clever and lovely daughter like me. My joking words successfully made a smile appear on my mother's face. She looked at me and asked seriously, Yvonne, can you accept it if I divorce your father? Yes. Then will you choose to be with me? Yes. This time, I answered without hesitation. Perhaps my answer gave my mother strength. Confidence reappeared on my mother's face. After your entrance banquet is over tomorrow, I will mention divorce to him. Okay. I held my mother and slept with her. When her breathing was steady, I got up. I found a short hair of my father on the pillow and took the short hair and left the bedroom. Early the next morning, I found an excuse to go out first. I went to the hospital and took Rose's hair. Then I submitted the hairs of Rose and my father, and the hairs of Rose and that aunt who delivered meals for paternity testing. After returning home, my mother and I set off for the hotel together. As noon approached, guests arrived one after another. My father was originally recuperating in the hospital. He still got up and came to my entrance banquet. I was originally a little worried that he would make a scene at the entrance banquet. It was only when my mother said that my father was the most vain that I breathed a sigh of relief. As my mother thought, my father, who usually didn't even give me a glance, was now full of smiles. The smile was so big that the bandage on his face couldn't cover it. Father of Yvonne, your daughter is really outstanding. That's right. She takes after me. Someone looked at his miserable appearance and asked with concern, What's wrong with you? How did you get hurt so badly? There were a few more shades of haze in his deep eyes. But the smile on my father's face was still brilliant. Oh, isn't it because I'm happy that my daughter was admitted to Harvard? I had one more drink and then fell like this. Hearing this, my mother and I looked at each other and couldn't help laughing. I have to say, he is quite good at finding reasons for himself. This ability to lie with one's eyes open really has a place to be used. Guests went in wave after wave. Finally, under my mother's eager anticipation, my grandparents came. At first, because my mother stubbornly married my father, my grandparents were angry. Over the years, although they secretly helped in my mother's career, there was almost no obvious interaction. Every time my mother went back to see them, they would put on a straight face. Only when facing me would the two old people be happy. But in fact, I know that they are just caring about my mother in my name. They love me because of my mother. Dad, Mom, you finally came. My mother breathed a sigh of relief. My grandparents looked arrogant. If it weren't for fearing that Yvonne's entrance banquet would have regrets, we wouldn't come. Yes. 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 I'll take you in. My mother went to help my grandparents. My classmates also came. The Shang family also came. And Rose's family also came. As noon approached and the guests were almost all here, I still didn't see Julian's figure. Only at this time did I feel that I was a bit hasty. I don't know how Julian's academic performance is. I don't know which university he was admitted to either. Inviting him here so hastily. Just as I was thinking, a familiar voice suddenly came from above. Excuse me, where should I sit? I looked up and just met Julian's good-looking eyes. I'll take you there. As I said that, a smile involuntarily bloomed on my face. I took Julian to the table where my high school classmates were sitting. Seeing Julian, the girls who were chatting freely suddenly blushed and fell silent. Yvonne, you are so amazing. You even invited the school president, who is never close to anyone. Hearing this, I just smiled and didn't say anything. The Yvonne family group is not small. Most of the people who come to my entrance banquet are business partners. I followed my father and mother to toast everyone. When it was the turn of the table where the Shang family was sitting, someone expressed doubts. Why are your in-laws sitting with us? My mother said with a smile, it's like this. Yvonne's engagement with Charles has been cancelled. In fact, the engagement between the two was just a joke many years ago and can't be taken seriously. Everyone present is shrewd. No one continued to ask. On the contrary, Charles's parents were not happy. However, they also endured and didn't express their opinions. My mother wanted to leave some dignity for the Shang family. But I didn't. How can there be such a good thing in the world where people who have done unseemly things still want to end decently? I looked at Rose. She covered her stomach and looked struggling, as if she was hesitating whether to expose on the spot that she was pregnant with Charles's child. So, I simply walked towards Charles not far from her. Halfway through the walk, suddenly, my foot twisted and my body fell straight forward. And right in front of me was Rose. Seeing that I was about to fall on Rose, suddenly there was a force around my waist. It was Julian. He hugged my waist. Thank you. Standing straight in Julian's arms, I thanked him. The still shaken Rose exploded. She stood up from the chair, covering her stomach, and pointed at me to accuse. Yvonne, you did it on purpose. You just can't bear that I'm pregnant with Charles's child, and want to take this opportunity to get rid of my child. As soon as Rose's words came out, the whole place was in an uproar. Everyone instantly understood. The reason why I broke off the engagement with Charles was that Charles had hooked up with my cousin and even had a child. Everyone present cared about Face. Many people looked at the Shang family with contempt on their faces. Father Zhang and Mother Zhang cared most about Face. Mother Zhang immediately denied. Rose, what are you talking about? Our Charles is not someone you can hook up with just because you want to. At this point, Rose gave up completely. Auntie, you know very well whether the child in my stomach is Charles's or not. If you really don't recognize it, when the child is born later, just do a paternity test. You bitch. I'll tear your mouth apart. Seeing that the Shang family and David's family were about to fight again, my mother directly asked the security guards to throw these two families out. The scene became quiet again. There was more sympathy in everyone's eyes when they looked at me. Of course, except for my father among these people. His face was livid, and his eyes seemed to want to eat me up. After the entrance banquet ended and as soon as we got home, my father erupted. Why are you two mother and daughter so vicious? Rose is pregnant with Charles's child, and is not recognized by the Zhang family. She is already very pitiful. Do you really want to kill her? But isn't this what she deserves? Yvonne, don't think I don't dare to teach you a lesson. My father strode towards me. The security guards stood in front of me, and surrounded me tightly. If you don't want to be beaten and hospitalized again, just go ahead and do it. I knew you weren't a good thing. You. Enough. My mother couldn't bear it anymore. and interrupted my father's words. Zachary, let's get a divorce. Divorce? Vera, are you kidding? My father's tone was full of shock and contempt. Obviously, in his perception, no matter how he treats my mother and me, my mother will not divorce him. Yes, divorce, my mother said firmly. After a while, my father, who had accepted this fact, sneered. If you want a divorce, then split the property equally. Why should we split it equally with you? What have you contributed to this family except eating, drinking, and having fun? I was dissatisfied. But my mother said, okay. Later I'll ask a lawyer to draw up an agreement. Then that's it. After my father went upstairs, my mother looked at me and comforted me. Yvonne, since we have decided to get a divorce, it is most important to make a quick decision. Mom can earn money again. Moreover, he is your father after all. It's nothing to give him some money. What my mother said also made sense. So I didn't say anything for the time being. Seeing that my mother was okay, I told my mother that I was going out to find a classmate. In fact, I went to the hospital. I hope my guess is wrong. In that case, in order not to make my mother too sad, I can let Zachary get a little property. When I arrived at the hospital, I got the appraisal results smoothly. When I opened the appraisal report and saw the result on it, I was so angry that I could hardly breathe. I guessed right. Rose is really the child of Zachary and that aunt who delivers meals. I immediately took the appraisal result back to show my mother. My mother, who was still sad about her decades-long marriage, was wrapped in anger when she found out that the child my father had through an extramarital affair was 3 years older than me. As expected of my mother, even though she was angry, she was not swallowed up by anger and lost her reason. She called my grandparents. She told them about this matter. My grandparents came with my 3 uncles. My father, who was taking a nap, was dragged out of bed by my 3 uncles and beaten wildly. He was already injured and was beaten until he was on the verge of death. Then my eldest uncle put a divorce agreement in front of him and asked him to sign it. When my father saw that it said he had to leave the house with nothing, he refused to sign it no matter what. My eldest uncle snorted coldly. Zachary, think it over. If you don't sign, I will sue you for bigamy tomorrow and let you go to prison. Not only that, but I will beat up every other member of your Yvonne family every time I see them. You will never get ahead in your life. My father, who only then knew about Rose's matter, signed his name with a defeated expression. At this moment, my parents got divorced completely. From now on, he is no longer my father. Zachary was thrown out of the villa like garbage. I'm so angry. If it weren't for considering Yvonne, I would definitely make him go to prison. My uncles were extremely angry. My mother couldn't care about being sad and turned to comfort the emotions of my grandparents and uncles. Finally, my grandparents and uncles pitied my mother and me and insisted on taking us to live with them for a while. At my grandparents' house, I felt an unprecedented warmth. So warm that I never want to go back. My mother also thought that villa was inauspicious and directly sold it at a price lower than the market price. There is still more than a month before Harvard starts. My mother asked me, "What are your plans next?" "Mom, I want to go to the company for an internship. After getting rid of the scum, making money is the most important thing. I want to learn how to manage the company early so that I can inherit the family business." After hearing my answer, my mother smiled. Coincidentally, I have the same plan. My mother took me to buy several professional outfits. Wearing professional outfits and tying up my long hair, I am confident and unrestrained in the mirror. Not as cowardly as in my previous life. The next day, my mother and I went to the company. Witnessing with my own eyes my mother giving instructions to the personnel department to fire all the people that Zachary had stuffed into the company before. Soon, my mother's phone in the president's office was ringing off the hook. Sister-in-law. We are relatives after all. The outrageous things Zachary did have nothing to do with me. Sister-in-law. I have already broken off relations with Zachary. Now it's not easy to find a job. Can you not fire me for the sake of our past friendship? In the face of interests. The brotherhood that Zachary is proud of is extremely fragile. Not wanting to waste time. My mother directly blacklisted all these people. My mother left me to a senior in the company. I have a lot to learn every day. In this business, the affairs of the Shang family and David's family also reached my ears without missing a single one. It's not that I want to listen. It's really that there are too many scandals of the Shang family recently, which are known to everyone in the circle. After Rose directly announced in public at my entrance banquet that she was pregnant with Charles's child, Shang's father and mother, who felt that their faces had been completely lost by Rose, ordered Charles not to have any more contact with Rose. I don't know if it's because Charles is affectionate or Rose is resourceful. Charles actually continued to be with Rose behind Shang's father and mother. When Shang's mother accidentally discovered it, she was so angry that she was hospitalized. Due to their ugly actions, several large cooperation projects of the Shang Group were ruined and suffered heavy losses. Seeing the company's stock price fall, Shang's father was extremely anxious. And that's not all. It turns out that Rose didn't know that she was an illegitimate daughter who couldn't be seen. After learning that the aunt who delivered meals was her own mother, she cursed Zachary and her own mother as shameless. In a fit of anger, she directly lost the child in her womb. Without a child, Rose no longer had a chance to marry into the Shang family. Her status in the Yvonne family plummeted. She was no longer arrogant, and began to coax Zachary again. After all, Zachary had money in his hands. The reason why Zachary divorced my mother neatly at the beginning was 1. He was afraid of going to jail and afraid of my several uncles. 2. He had private savings. And quite a lot. But how could he, who is used to living in luxury, endure the situation where his savings are gradually decreasing? Under temptation, Zachary became addicted. But within a month, several million was completely lost. Without money to rely on, Zachary could no longer be flattered and fawned upon by the people of the Yvonne family, and was kicked out of the family by them. As mentioned by neighbors of the previous villa, the embarrassed and down and out Zachary went to the villa to look for me and my mother. Unfortunately, the villa had already changed owners, and he didn't find anyone. Listening to others discussing the tragic situation of those people again, I found that there was not much fluctuation in my heart. I am already a person from a different world from them. No matter whether they live well or not in the future, I will strive to become better and better. On the day Harvard started school, at the school gate, Charles stopped me. Yvonne, I have completely broken off with Rose. We grew up together as childhood sweethearts. Can you forgive me this time? Ironically, I actually saw a bit of true affection in Charles's eyes. Some people are like this. They don't cherish what they easily get and fantasize about what they can't get. Sorry. I won't forgive. Looking at Charles even one more time, I feel it's a waste of life. I directly bypassed Charles and walked into the campus. A familiar figure came into view. It was Julian. He also had an admission letter in his hand. It seemed like he was waiting for me. Seeing me, he came over and invited me. Do you want to register together? Okay. I nodded and walked side by side with Julian. Let go of the past, and not be afraid of the future. I will eventually live as I want to be.